Well, we're just back from our trip to Europe. I was there with my Word on Fire team filming for our Catholicism documentary, and we visited some of the real gems of European Catholic art and architecture. We went to Notre Dame in Paris, Sainte-Chapelle in Paris, Chartres, which I think is the greatest church in the world. We were in Cologne at the magnificent Cologne Cathedral. We went to the Wawel Cathedral in Krakow. So some of the really great places. Well, we were finishing our filming at Sainte-Chapelle, and I turned to our cameraman, John Cummings, who's been with us on all of our trips, and I said, well, what'd you think about that? Because it really is. It's this jewel box of a place, gorgeous spot. I said, what'd you think? And he said, well, it's amazing, but you know, it's one more empty church. And that comment of his I thought was very insightful, and it stayed in my mind in a kind of haunting way, because it's true. As you go through the monuments of European Catholicism, more often than not, they can seem like objets d'art, you know, in a dusty museum of culture, rather than as vibrant, living places of faith. You know, very often they're the haunts of tourists, but not necessarily of the faithful. And I think of a couple things that confirm this. We were in Chartres on a Sunday morning for Mass. Our team was there, and it was a very cold morning, and we stayed at the cathedral for Mass. But it was very sparsely attended, and the average age of the people was quite high. Then in Unterlinden Museum in Colmar, that's where the magnificent Grunewald crucifixion is, one of my favorite paintings of the crucifixion in Western art. And there was a young woman with us who was kind of our fixer, helping us. Very bright young woman, very well educated, going for a doctorate in Italian literature. And she spoke, I think, 5 languages fluently. In some ways, there she's the cream of European, you know, culture and civilization. But yet she came to me and said, "What does this mean? This reference I see on the altarpiece about the Virgin giving birth to a child, and we call his name Emmanuel." And it struck me. Here's someone who's from the heart of Christian Europe, and just knows so little about the Christian faith. So I was just struck by that in Europe. What many commentators have noticed, that the faith is attenuated. It's diminishing. Mass attendance, you know, way down. And if I could generalize, the approach of many Europeans seems to be a sort of yawn of bored indifference to religion. Not so much hostility even, but just sort of a indifference to it. What's behind it? A lot of things. And in fact, in recent years, a lot of scholars have come forward to speculate about what happened to Christianity in Europe. A lot of different theories. One is, especially in France, that long association of the church with what they call the Ancien Régime, with the power structure, economic and political. So there was a reaction against it. The church was seen as on the side of the rich and powerful, indifferent to the struggles of the poor, and so there's this animosity which is still, I think, in the French consciousness. Other people point out that the great atheists, go back to Feuerbach and Marx and Freud and Auguste Comte and many others, whose skeptical atheism was first taught at a very high level, but is trickled down through the educational system, and now, you know, might be a sort of general consensus. Still others say, you know, the materialism, consumerism, individualism of modern culture has certainly undermined the faith's claims. One that I would add is, you know, the orgy of violence that Europe went through in the 20th century. Here's largely Christian Europe, and it goes through 2 world wars, 2 mostly successful attempts at genocide. And I think it broke something in the European spirit. I think you can't endure that kind of violence without something going wrong with the spirit. But for whatever reason, maybe all those and many others, there has been this weakening of faith in Europe. So one question that comes to mind, what's the way forward? What do we do in the wake of this? What do we say about it? Here's what strikes me. I think we have to recover the idea of the church as witness. The basic stance of the church in any culture in which it finds itself is to witness to Jesus Christ, especially in his death and his resurrection from the dead. That's the task of the church. Look, sometimes in the history of the church, that has met with great opposition. Other times it's met with a great deal of cultural acquiescence. Okay, so it goes. Look at the very beginning. Paul goes to the Areopagus in Athens, where all the points of view are on display, and Paul proclaims, as Christians always have, the resurrection of Jesus from the dead. He's met, the Acts of the Apostles tells us, with hostility, laughter. People walk away from him. Though a few listened, and there's the beginnings of Paul's mission in Europe, those few people that listened to him. But the general approach was one of hostility. Fast forward a few more centuries, the church faces terrible persecution, sometimes to the point of violent death. So the age of the martyrs. That's when the idea of Jesus risen from the dead met with enormous cultural resistance. Then, of course, after Constantine, there's much greater cultural acceptance of Christianity until finally you reach the High Middle Ages and the time of Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus and the building of Chartres Cathedral and the poetry of Dante. Now Christianity is shaping and forming the culture. It has that very powerful, vibrant role. Then, in the wake of the Reformation, the wake of the emergence of modernity, the church is in a much more ambiguous relationship with the culture. And now, as I've suggested, at least in Europe, it's different around other parts of the world, but in Europe, it's met with this kind of yawn of bored indifference. Okay, so it goes. When the church can influence the culture, it should. When it can shape the culture, it should try, it should do it. When it has to stand against the culture, it should do that too. Its main task is to bear witness. Who is Jesus Christ? And Jesus Christ risen from the dead. The church has that basic message. The cultures in some ways wax and wane around that. They crash against the rock of that great affirmation. Sometimes more positive, sometimes more negative. But the church's basic task, in season and out, as the cultural forms shift, is to witness. And in that we find our mission. And in that we find our deepest identity.